Bananas. Bright in colour, sweet in taste, full of potassium and good on a hat. Hello and welcome to a millinery hat making video. My name is Ilona, I'm a milliner based in London, and today I'm using banana fabric to make a banana hat. I will also show you how to block the banana fabric, or Sinamay, on a button block, and how to achieve various different effects. If this seems like something you enjoy watching, please like this video and consider subscribing to my channel for more millinery antics. For those of you not interested in banana silliness, skip to this timestamp for blocking sensible Sinamay patterned banana bases. Before we begin, let me clarify what I mean by banana fabric. This is Sinamay. It's made from the fibre of the abaca palm, which is a relative of the banana palm. It's a loose weave fabric that generally comes pre-stiffened for millinery use. Sinamay is a great material to use if you do not have access to hat blocks. You can block it on household items or shape it by hand. If you don't use too much moisture, it dries almost instantly, so you don't necessarily have to use pins to hold it down. So let's ramp up the whimsy, select your bananas, get your thimbles on, and let's get started. For working with Sinamay, you will need some Milliner's straw needles, round nose jewellery pliers, a thimble, small scissors, Pleated ribbon and a block. I will be using a softwood button block today, but you can use whatever shapes you have to hand. For a more detailed list of tools and materials, please see the description box. Obviously, the first step is selecting my banana to block on. I've chosen one that I think looks most pleasing with its natural proportions. It's got just the right girth, length and firmness. I am taking the width measurements of its segments and the longest length measurement following its outer curve. Now for the Sinamay. I always start by ironing the entire length of my Sinamay. The aim is to straighten out the fibres along the grain lines. The straighter you can get the grain lines, the better your finished hat will look. When ironing Sinamay, I will sandwich it between sheets of baking paper. Sinamay for millinery usually comes pre-stiffened, and this stiffener becomes sticky when it is moistened and heated. The baking paper helps to protect the iron and the ironing board from this sticky residue. You can also use a Teflon coated iron protector which directly attaches to your iron. However, mine got damaged only after about 1 year of use, so I can't use it today. For the cutting, I think Sinamay always looks best cut on the bias, and working with bias cuts means nicer and easier curves. See my bias in millinery video. To find the true bias, I like to use a triangle ruler. I am marking the Sinamay with a Sharpie alcohol marker. However, I don't recommend you do this. Use either a pencil or a Frixion pen. The markings from a Frixion pen should disappear from heat from the iron later. Next, I am essentially making Sinamay bias bindings in the sizes and widths of the banana segments. Fold the Sinamay in half, making sure to line up all the grain lines. Then fold the edges inwards in half again. This traps all the raw cut edges on the inside of the bias strip. Make sure the edges aren't quite touching the central fold. This will create much neater strips. Now I am ready to block on the banana. I am intending to use it in the same way as I would use a wooden hat block, so I'm going to cover it in a plastic bag. This will not only prevent the Sinamay from sticking to the banana surface, but also protect the banana from being cooked by steam from the iron. To shape the Sinamay, I am placing it over the banana and applying steam from my steam iron. Then, while it is still hot, moulding it around the shape of the banana and pinning it in place. If I pull on the bias strip, it will curve around the concave parts of the banana. If I push the grain lines in the Sinamay together, it will conform to the convex part of the banana curve. Also, a note on pins. If you push them in all the way like I did, you will end up dimpling the Sinamay surface. To avoid this, it's best to push the pins in only halfway into the banana. Advice useful only to those planning on blocking on their own bananas. Please be careful when using a steam iron like this. I burnt myself rather badly later on in this process. You will notice a blister on my left hand later on in the video. In the end, 3 bias strips were enough to cover the whole banana with a 2mm overlap of each segment. As for the 2 ends of the banana, the long tip I steamed and shaped by hand, compressing and stretching the Sinamay until it held its elongated shape. Then for the flat end, I decided that it would look quite elegant if I twisted the overhanging Sinamay almost like they do on bonbon sweet wrappers. I plan to cut the excess off later once it is dry. And there we go, 1 blocked banana in banana fabric. I'll leave that to dry for a couple of hours.
3 hours later.
It's time to unblock and sew up. Surprisingly, the Sinamay slipped off the banana quite easily. As it is 4 layers thick, it is super sturdy and holds its shape very well. The best way I could think of sewing this together was to peel apart the segments and put in tiny little invisible stab stitches in a matching yellow thread. I put a stitch in every 3 centimeters or so. This was just enough to join it all back together. For the last join, I had to do some odd manoeuvring. I am sure there is a technical way of naming these stitches, but the best I can think of is horizontal travelling slip stab stitches. I'm sure you can come up with something better in the comments. And now it's time to cut the bonbon wrapper off the end of the banana nib. This was much denser than I expected. As for securing that in place, Yoo-hoo glue was the best solution. There would be no way I could get a needle through that compressed Sinamay density. And I will quickly add some of the same Yoo-hoo glue at the top stem end also. I used a toothpick for a precise application. For drying, I used clothes pegs to hold everything together. Whilst I could have put this banana onto a standard Sinamay base, I think it is better to design hats in context with a dress. As you can see, my dress has a multicolour chevron pattern to it, so I thought I should bring this onto my banana hat base. I've drawn up some quick diagram sketches here, and I want to show you how to execute drawing numbers 5, 6 and 3. I would describe these as a chevron pattern exactly like my dress, a herringbone pattern in the same colours as my dress, and a simple plain pleated coral option as a complement to my dress. While making all these bases, I had an idea for a checkerboard button base. It doesn't really fit into the banana chevron theme of this video, so I'll release this one separately to my Patreons. Follow the link in the description to join the beret hat tier, where you can find that video already uploaded. Joining my Patreon helps to support the channel and the making of these videos here on YouTube. Thank you so much to my current Patreons for your continual support. I really couldn't do this without you. I will start by blocking a single layer of light blue Sinamay. A single layer is going to be enough as my base, as instead of being structural, it is more like a lining to attach the other colours to it. I don't need to wait for this to dry, as I won't be taking it off the block until I have completed the entire chevron pattern. But I will cut the excess Sinamay away from the underside and also remove the blocking pins. I'm going to draw on my central bias line using a Frixion pen. You've already seen me cut and prepare Sinamay bias strips for the banana, and for these chevrons it's the same process. To place these strips onto the blocked base, I'm going to follow the direction of the central bias line, pinning and curving the strips as I go. I haven't used any water spray here, just steam from the iron. Without water, the steam can dry almost instantly, and I can hold it in place with my hands as it does so. I'm trying to be super neat here, making sure all the edges butt up against each other, giving the illusion of a flat piece of Sinamay fabric. Once all these strips are in place, I'm going to use the iron to compress and adhere everything together. I have given up on using the baking paper, but if I was being a good and proper milliner, I would have used it. This is where the Teflon iron cover comes in handy. The steam and high heat with added pressure from me pushing the iron into the block is what will hold this pattern together. As there was hardly any moisture, it is already dry and can be taken off the block. I will first cut off the excess Sinamay from the underside, hook a flexible plastic corset bone in between the block and the cling film, and all the Sinamay should pop right off. There are a few places where I will need to put in a couple of small stitches just to make sure everything continues to hold together. But before I do that, let's have a quick evaluation of this design. It is nice and sturdy whilst being super light. However, you can see the gaps in between the coloured strips and you can see the base poking out from under that. Also, the flatness of it isn't terribly pleasing to me. Butting up the Sinamay strips rather than overlaying them has created a rather flat looking hat. I don't think it looks special enough to justify the amount of time and effort that went into making this. So with the next hat, let's work on improving those problems. This time, the herringbone pattern. I am starting just like last time with a single layer of blocked light blue Sinamay. I'm going for an overlapping herringbone pattern with displaced colours. So I'm going to compress my displaced coloured Sinamay strips into V shapes and trim the ends into neat chevron shapes, always following the grain lines. And once again, just like on the previous hat, I have drawn on a central bias line using my Frixion pen. Now the placement of these bias strips will be almost the same as last time, but I'm going to overlap them and start working from the back to the front. I've discovered that it is much easier to pin them all down on the centre first and only then apply the steam to shape them around the block. The trouble is that every time I apply steam, all the strips move unless they are really well pinned down onto the hat block and to each other. So unlike last time, I'm having to meticulously pin as I go. But the more pins I put in, the harder it is to shape the remaining strips. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that this is very time consuming and I hope the end result is worth all this faffing around. I should mention I have been cutting the strips before pinning them down to the underside hollow of the block. This makes for a much neater work in progress and means that I can see where all my pins are and avoid scratching myself. Once I'm happy with the result, I can start to remove the pins a few at a time and use the hot iron to slightly set the Sinamay. No steam this time though, or everything will move. So how did this one turn out? Definitely a lot better than the last one. The slight 2mm overlap on the chevrons eliminates the previous problem of the underlayer of Sinamay showing through and adds a certain pleasing 3D-ness and texture. Now this base would be perfect, but I have made a small error. I wanted the herringbone pattern to be central on the hat, but it seems to have skewed to the side. This is because I was aligning this corner here to my central line. I should have been aligning this central intersection to the central line. Never mind, at least I know this for next time. It's still a lovely little button and with a nice trim, I am sure it will find the right head. Long-time viewers will know how much I love pleats. I've made a video about using pleats on hats which I have linked to in the top right. With this base, I want to apply the principles from that fabric video to using Sinamay. So on we go with this coral pleated version. I'm running low on Sinamay in this coral colour and have plenty of yellow left over, so I'm going to use this yellow as the base layer. This time I'm blocking it in 2 rotated layers just to see if 2 layers are better than 1. Now let's apply the coral strips. This is actually much easier than the previous 2 chevron and herringbone patterns. I have started in the centre and worked my way to one edge before returning to the other edge and filling up strips back to the centre. I confess I actually made this one before making the other chevron and herringbone bases, so let's use this footage as an opportunity to talk about what not to do. Here is the blocked button without the pins in it. What I haven't done is compressed it together with pressure and heat from the iron. This meant that when I took it off the block here, all the coral strips fell off and came apart from the base. This really doesn't matter because I will just sew them back on in a bit, but it does add an extra step. Finally, let me show you how to wire one of these buttons. You will need some 1.2mm wire the length of the outermost circumference of your block plus a 5cm overlap. Join your overlap using tight little cross stitches working from the centre outwards to the right, then back through to the centre, to the left, and then back to the centre again. Gently bend the Sinamay edges back and place the wire to the inside of the curve. Try to not let it bend out of shape as you do this. I'm going to sew the wire in using a millinery wire stitch. I'm keeping my travelling stitches on the outside because I will cover them with coral strips later. If you are sewing the wire to a button with the decorative Sinamay already on the outside, you will have to keep the travelling stitches on the inside to hide them. Now that the wire is in, I can reposition all the coral strips back onto the base and sew them down. I've placed some stab stitches down the centre and along the edges. I think this one is the best base to complement my banana, so this is the one I have worked on finishing. And here is the finished hat worn with the dress. I'll be wearing it to a few garden parties in the near future, and yes, one of them is banana themed. I absolutely love re-wearing all my favourite looks. After all, I've put so much time and effort into them, I want to wear them as much as possible. Thank you all so much for watching, liking and subscribing. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for the Sinamay checkerboard button base hat, and I will see you next time. Bye!